Okay, our two less wrong posts this month, or this episode, were some claims are just too extraordinary and outside the laboratory. Stephen, you were just talking about outside the laboratory, but let's start with some claims are just too extraordinary because chronologically that one came first.
Totally.
Okay, cool. So some claims are just too extraordinary. Okay, is a post about the nature of evidence and how it relates to extraordinary claims.
And sort of a defense of the hubris of science.
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to call it hubris. Rather, defending that what science isn't hubris.
Exactly. The post basically says that some claims are really absolutely extraordinary. It starts off with a quote from Thomas Jefferson, who says, "I would sooner believe that two Yankee professors would lie than that stones would fall from heaven." And that was his take on meteors. And the post points out that there is a method of getting to the truth that is optimized for weeding out false claims, and so it counts as extraordinary evidence and can thus substantiate extraordinary claims like rocks fall out of the sky. The quote that I pulled from this is, "A replicated scientific report is a special kind of extraordinary claim, designed by the surrounding process to be more extraordinary evidence than simple verbal claims. It is more extraordinary evidence because the surrounding process, and I would place a far greater premium on replication than on peer reviews, by the way, is constructed to deny entrance to claims that are in fact false. In this way, the replicated scientific report becomes capable of overcoming greater burdens of prior improbability." So, yeah, it was basically a post on why scientific evidence can be trusted, right?
Yeah, and I think I had that joke before about, like, I won't take your word for it that werewolves exist, but if you brought me a dead werewolf, I'd believe you. That's sort of the extraordinary evidence to substantiate that extraordinary claim, and that's what science does.
Yeah.
And I want to reiterate that when I had said that there's already an enterprise that sort of does the truth-seeking thing, that's what science does, but they do, I think, in my experience of not being a real scientist, they focus less on, like, the self-improvement part of science. Like, you know, it's less important that, like, you're a better and more updated and well-rounded, calibrated person, just more that your test results are accurate. Whereas rationality is like, no, it can be about you too. There's a virtue of rationality, but there's a practice of science, maybe. There are virtues of science, I don't know.
But yeah, science does double blind, which, shows that they have some awareness of the fact that we delude ourselves. That there's been a lot more work on that, like, pretty recently too.
True.
Replication crisis and...
Yeah.
I found it interesting that he posted in here that he puts far greater premium on replication than on peer review, and this was before the replication crisis, where he said, peer review is okay and all, but the reason I point this out is because I was, part of the whole atheist scene during the early days, and whenever people tried to bring about, like, I know that God existed because I saw my mother being healed from whatever she had, one of the go-to replies was, "That's great, but that's your anecdotal evidence, which I don't believe because you're easily fooled. Is it, has it been published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal?" And there was always this focus on peer-reviewed, and apparently that has not really been high enough of a bar. Lots of things get past peer review because people are just sort of reviewing what you said, right? And having things actually be replicated is where the big deal is, and that's where we got the replication crisis, when people started trying and failing to replicate things.
And to be fair, peer review is a higher standard than most people hold themselves to,
Yes.
right? So most people just allow themselves license to believe whatever they want. They don't even ask their friends or their trusted smart allies to corroborate. So doing that, at least science is ahead of the curve there, but it's not high enough. They can do better. And
I specifically remember because I many times myself said, peer-reviewed scientific journal, and then I felt stupid.
yeah, because
I used to do that too. I would specifically focus on the peer review aspect. I don't even know why. Probably just because I heard so many other people say that.
Right. It was a teacher's password.
Yep.
yeah, well, and the thing of scientists having double blind so they can correct for their own biases, that's true, but it's possible to do that as merely a thoughtless ritual and not do that as like a cognitively sapient person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or again, the scientist who can fully believe in whatever magic bullshit they want, but get papers published because they're doing the rituals, right?
Yeah.
That's where the next post comes in. But I won't skip straight there. But let's see.
I did really like the Thomas Jefferson quote because, like, there were 3 quotes at the beginning of this post, and the latter 2 were both posted very approvingly. And when I first read that Thomas Jefferson quote, I was like, ah, ha, ha, that's funny. Look at how wrong he was. But after I read the post, I went back and read that quote again, and I think that was also meant to be an approving quote, like this is the correct way to do science. Like Thomas Jefferson heard from two guys that rocks fell out of the sky, and that was not good enough for him. And yeah, it really shouldn't have been. But the scientific method does exist, and so people manage to replicate this, and at this point in time, no one doubts that rocks fall out of the sky. We all know about meteors because science has proven it and over. And I don't know if Thomas Jefferson lived long enough to actually see that proven by science, but you know, the fact remains that he might have been convinced eventually as enough scientific evidence accumulated, because scientific evidence is a very special kind of evidence that will convince, you know, anyone in time.
I wish it would convince anyone in time.
Well, it should.
Anyone who's trying to be accurate.
It's like taking the evidence in good faith.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that Jefferson's rejection of the meteorite hypothesis was
correct.
Fully reasonable from where he's at. And it might have been unreasonable for him to hear this from two people and be like, that's it. I believe that rocks fall out of the sky now, because all he's had is just two anecdotes.
Yeah.
Or rather, anecdotes from two people.
Yeah,
Right.
well, specifically from two professors, which I think is an important part of that too. When we were talking about peer review versus double blinding or versus, you know, replication, the people who are peer reviewing you are also presumably experts in the field, but you're assuming that means that they're impervious to biases. They're not.
Right. That's fair, yeah.
It's like argument from authority.
Yeah.
Jefferson accurately, you know, correctly applied Occam's razor there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he happens to land on the wrong side of the position, but that's because he was using the best tools he had at the time.
Yeah, but
So-
you have to imagine that if he had been presented with evidence, he would have said, oh, now I have the evidence, so I'll
Right.
update in favor of rocks falling from the heavens.
There you go.
And I mean, that wasn't just the thing that happened back then. Continental drift wasn't really accepted until, the late 50s, early 60s? Up until that point. There's still people alive today who, you know, thought that the Earth was an unchanging, solid thing, and had to be convinced over a period of time with the accumulation of evidence that no, it actually moves and changes, which is kind of fucking crazy if you think about it, right? The only reason it doesn't seem crazy is because we all already know it and accept it.
There's a lot of wisdom to draw from that last sentence. That sure, you know, science is I guess you see that all the time where people don't give science all the credit it deserves, because it's like, oh, of course we already knew that like stuff's made of atoms and that
Germ theory of disease.
yeah, exactly, the germs are real or something, because we're all taught that in elementary school. But it's like, yeah, but this was hard to figure out, and this wasn't born knowledge that our species had from the beginning, right? This was hard won.
Yeah, you see a lot of people kind of look back in history and laugh at how dumb everybody was, and it's like, you're standing on the shoulders of giants right now. You
Yeah.
would have believed exactly the same shit.
Exactly. And I think it's hard to you know, I can't remember, I read Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything like 10 years ago.
Which is not very short.
No, but it's a short
Of nearly everything.
Yeah, nearly everything.
Comparatively.
But he did talk about continental drift, and I know that like the fact that the continents look like puzzle pieces that was slid together wasn't lost on people through the 50s. I don't know how they rationalized that 100 years ago.
How that could be a coincidence. How unlikely is it that the Earth has moved so that these massive landmark masses have moved away from each other?
Well, but it becomes more likely that that's the case
I mean,
every
they
time you
aren't
look
perfect.
at the coasts of other continents and be like, look, those fit right together.
But they don't fit right together. I mean, there's been erosion and other stuff. They roughly fit together.
That explains fault lines.
yeah, I guess it's one of those things that I think that was one of the fact that they look like they aren't just random shapes, you know, with relation to each other was
That was another piece, but it was, you know, it wasn't determinate.
no, it couldn't be. That's not enough. You'd have to explain how this is happening and that like land isn't. I mean, everything about your senses and every experiment you can do without really good instruments tells you that the land is just sitting there and goes all the way to the center, and it's land all the way down. How does this move like
Well,
something floating on the water, right?
And even if it isn't land all the way down, how does just solid Earth like this move? It's not like it's floating. And
Right.
even if it was floating, there's other Earth pushing against it, holding it in place.
So it challenges intuition.
Yeah.
But I guess for me, I think that was always something that people would have had to answer going back 100 years ago, or up to whatever, 70 years ago, when they figured finally that they bought onto this tectonic plate / continental
Plasma.
drift. They'd have to at least say, look, why do they look like they kind of fit together? And they can't just say, it's a coincidence. And maybe they did.
It could. Yeah.
But that seems like a bad answer. And if anything,
I mean, that's like,
that would have been enough to incentivize people to keep looking into it and then come to the right answer.
to me, that's like someone asking, well, why does that tree look like has a human face in it if it wasn't, you know, if it doesn't take some essence from the body that is buried beneath it, right? It's like, look, the bark just happens to look like a human face.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, but the answer to is it's probably just a coincidence.
I
Or
don't-
it's a not understood scientific phenomena that we can't like explain yet. It's always frustrating when you do have to give those answers to people.
And it's not like the West Coast matches against Asia at all, right?
Okay, yeah, you got to rotate some stuff. And all right, yeah, that's fair. It's a funny puzzle, and it's not perfect, but
Yeah. It's a hint.
It's a hint. That's what I was getting at. Thank
Yeah.
you for distilling it down. It took me 5 minutes to get there.
Dark energy was also a thing that I remember. Were you cognizant of science yet when dark energy was discovered?
I don't know about when it was discovered. I remember a lot of discussions around it, which
Okay.
I guess continue to this day.
It was the craziest fucking thing when people first discovered that the universe is actually accelerating. And I mean, that was quite the talk of me and my friends at the time. Because this is a whole new force we'd never known about, right?
I remember the buzz discussed at least in historical context in books by like Tyson and Hawking and stuff.
But none of us doubted it when we heard it.
Well, this actually kind of brings me back to like I have this thought about the argument from authority that, and I think I've brought this up on the podcast and received flack for it. Now that I think about it, maybe this was a blog post back when I
Do
had a
it
blog.
again.
Yeah. That if Stephen Hawking says dark energy is real and here's why, I am fully justified in just believing him because he's an authority on it.
Mm-hmm.
What would be wrong for me to say is that it's true because he said it. What I say instead is that I think Hawking says it because it's true,
Yeah.
and I am not equipped to challenge him on that.
Yeah, I'd update more in favor of this being true because Stephen Hawking believes in it.
Yeah, in fact, I would bet that he's right. I literally bet with my money, and if someone wants to take me up on that and then go prove Hawking wrong, they're welcome to. So it's sort of just there's this because this was like one of those things that you get a lot of easy practice at arguing with religious people in your teens. If you say, "Oh well, the science says that you tell somebody a religious creationist that you're wrong that the Earth is 10,000 years old, and they say, "Well, you just believe that it's 14 billion years old because your scientists say it's 14 billion years old. Why do you believe them?" That's an argument from authority too.
Mm-hmm.
You're claiming I'm using an argument from authority just believing my favorite book. But it's a different kind of belief in authority.
Yeah. It's
It's like
because one has extraordinary evidence behind it.
Right. They have this prestige that your book doesn't. And if there was some big update in the community of in the next 50 years they discover something, another weird force of nature or whatever, and it's like, holy shit, guys, the universe is probably closer to 50 billion years old. Then I'm going to start believing that. It'd be weird of me to stick with the Eld science of 1990 that said the universe is 14 billion years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference there in that it's flexible to the current consensus, and that consensus has huge incentives to be pushed more and more towards accuracy.
Yeah, that's another, argument you can give to the person who says, well, you're just believing in your authorities. It's like, well, science isn't dogma.
Right, yeah. That's never been good enough for them either. If they
Yeah.
were, we would still be sitting on Aristotle's shoulders rather than on Newton's and Einstein's, right?
Yeah.
So
There's a reason that this evidence is accepted more highly than just someone's word.
and it's just the bizarre irony of having that argument online of
Yeah.
like, look, we're having this conversation at like the speed of light, and one of us
Science works. Like,
Yeah.
we have shot rockets into space. We've cured diseases. Like, what has the Catholic Church done?
We have absolutely not shot rockets into space because the Earth is flat. And this
Okay.
is all a conspiracy.
I see.
touche, sir.
Walks away quickly.
So it ends with the question, what about journals that came to publish replicated reports of ESP?
So extrasensory phenomena, is that what that stands for? It's been a
Yeah.
long time. So I know what ESP is. I just remember if I knew the acronym. That's the idea that like I can read your thoughts,
Yeah.
or
you can push things over with your brain.
or detect a tragedy on the other side of the world with a disturbance in the force or something.
Right.
It's like remote viewing.
Yeah.
something.
All the weird stuff that people are supposedly able to do in their heads.
That's just proof that scientists were, fell prey to cognitive biases twice,
Yeah.
or motivated reasoning, or whatever they wanted it to be true. They, because it's
Why are you rejecting it out of hand, though?
Because it challenges everything else that we've uncovered through the laws of nature. But then we're just trusting other authority, other peer-reviewed papers, right?
Right.
Yeah, this was the kind of thing that like James Randi, I mentioned, I think Project Alpha a couple episodes ago, where he sent in he sent in students to go in to do more of like the same magic research that people like Uri Geller were being paid to do.
Yeah.
And at any point, if they were asked, "Are you tricking us?" they were supposed to say, "Yes, James Randi sent me," and they were never asked that because you get scientists are people too, and they're motivated by the same things the rest of us are. It'd be great if they were just like these super smart robots that were giving us, just pushing out truth every time, but they're asking their own questions and trying to answer them themselves. And the other problem, I think, with peer review is that like you could get a peer-reviewed creationist journal, and I'm sure they exist, where a bunch of other deluded morons come together and say, and nod their heads and say yes.
There actually are peer-reviewed ESP journals.
Yeah. So it has to be in the special community of real science. But if that doesn't sound culty, I don't know what does.
Yes.
Right.
So.
And like, how are you defining your real scientist?
Just because it was replicated, I'd still want to look at the study's design.
Yeah.
Like, was it double-blinded? Okay, I did jump too hard onto dismissing it out of hand just because of what Stephen was just talking about. Like, we've seen this before. We know
Well,
why this happens, but...
Right. I would absolutely dismiss ESP out of hand too. I just had to think for a while about why I would. I mean, I think part of it is because it directly contradicts a lot of things that are already far more better established about physics and how reality works. And because there are much less unlikely explanations for those phenomena as well. The explanation they give has a better answer than ESP exists.
Yeah, it's easier to believe that some scientists deluded themselves than that ESP exists. It's kind of the same Jefferson answer. I'm still open to being proven wrong if they came to me with some extraordinary evidence. But
That's the thing. If like the entire scientific community were to be like, guys, dude, we were wrong. There is like this whole psi thing that taps into this other quantum dimension, and a few people have evolved, enough to be able to influence it just slightly, and here's how it works. I'd be like,
that'd be
holy
cool.
shit! Yeah, they discovered another aspect of reality. That's awesome.
And we'd all love that. And
Yeah.
that was James Randi's $1 million prize was always like a...
a little bit hopeful, right?
Well, it had a sharp and a dull edge. It was used as a weapon to call out charlatans, but it was also like, if we ended up paying out this $1 million, we'd be stoked because we discovered something new. And I think Richard Dawkins asked James Randi, like, if you had this challenge 120 years ago, wouldn't you have paid out if somebody was like using a radio? And Randi thought about it and then said, yeah, I guess so. If somebody had invented a radio before they existed and was using it to win to pass our judgment and our tests, then yeah, we would have paid out the $1 million. But then, hey, we would have been the ones to have demonstrated that radio existed and worked. Sure, they invented it, but we would have happily paid out that $1 million.
Yeah, and then you'd get the radio, you'd take it apart, you'd figure out how it worked, and then you'd have a radio 122 years earlier.
Yeah,
Which
so
would have been a big win.
exactly. And so then the today analog would be like, what if somebody proved psi or something through a similar thing? It's like, well, then we just helped discover or helped seriously validate a new discovery as important as something like that.
Yeah.
And so
At which point you can measure it, figure out what causes it,
Yeah, exactly.
replicate it.
totally. So in that sense,
Like the fact that you can't do anything with these supposed ESP powers except some occasional parlor tricks is really indicative.
right. And
Yeah, ask Wildbow what he'd do with it. Actually, don't, because he'd probably just destroy the world with monsters. But
yeah, I think, man, I had something. I guess I was going to just reiterate that the point that, yes, if science did come out and say, yes, ghosts are real or something, we'd all be stoked on that.
I'd be stoked. That means death is fake.
Exactly. That's always been my thing on ghosts, or at least for like the last 10 years. I've always, if ghosts are demonstrated to be real, I would be stoked. But the thing is, A, I really want it to be real, so I need to be extra careful. And B, I because of that extra carefulness, I have a very high standard of evidence. If we went to a haunted house and a cup fell off a table, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, spirits are real. So like what would constitute proof for ghosts? Like a number of people passing that Houdini seance test, right?
I don't know what this Houdini seance test is.
So Houdini, every year, he'd said, hey, when I die, I gave my wife a password. You guys conduct a seance for me. And if the spirit in the room tells her the password, she'll know it was me.
Okay.
So they keep doing on his birthday or on his death day or something. They do the seance every year.
Oh, really?
I don't know if
Does
anyone
somebody
alive.
still have the password?
That's what I was gonna ask. I don't know if anyone alive has the password.
She
But
must
like,
have passed it to her kids or something.
but something like if your grandma came back and was like, hey, the combination that's safe in my closet is this, and then you went in and the safe actually opened, or check behind my dresser, I dropped my diamond ring back there and it's back there. Just enough things that were verifiable communications from the afterlife. That would be good evidence. But a cold spot in a room, no, right? who even said ghosts are cold? That was one of my big
'Cause
gripes
dead
about
people are cold.
Yeah, sure, but these aren't bodies, right? If anything, they're concentrations of energy, which might be hot. I don't know. But this whole thing of like, we were talking about before we started recording about using like a heat gun or a thermal reading gun to read which parts of my rooms are drafty or something. If I see a cold spot over there, who decided that that's a ghost?
Right.
If anything, I think a hot spot is like just a priori to me more likely to be a ghost. So what I'm getting at is that's bad evidence. I would need good evidence like verifiable tests.
Yeah, I really like ghost hunters who kind of just decided a bunch of, okay, like, ghosts are this, this, and this, so we're going to use these tools to find anomalies.
Yeah, ultra low frequencies or
Yeah.
those radio scanners that just jump between the radio and like, oh my god, we just heard the word fuck. That means the ghost is mad at us. Those are if there was.
We don't know anything about ghosts, so how like, we've never actually had any evidence of ghosts that we can say, okay, this is more or less likely to be a sign that this is a ghost.
Exactly.
I remember reading an interview with a surgeon who, on like the top of a shelf in the surgery room or wherever
Yeah,
it was.
they put a card.
Yeah. They put something, and whenever anyone had an out-of-body experience, they'd be like, "Oh, cool. What's that card say up there?" And they're like, "What card?" I'm like, "Oh, you didn't actually see anything then."
Yeah, you didn't see that put a jack of clubs up on top of the light?
Yeah.
I don't want to derail us, but we talked a bit about the next post. Or do we want to move on to that one officially?
Yeah.
So this one was outside the laboratory, and this one starts with the kind of tongue-in-cheek quote that outside the laboratory, scientists are no wiser than anyone else. And we should be very disturbed by that fact. So we talked about we can kind of skim parts of this because that's kind of true in some cases, but as Yudkowsky I think eloquently puts, that if a scientist is only a scientist when they're wearing the lab coat, they're not a real scientist. They're following the rituals of science, but they don't know why.
Did you want to read his awesome Apprentice Shepherd analogy?
Yeah. Also, isn't there an audio version of this full story somewhere out there already?
I don't think there is, actually.
Didn't you do it?
I don't think I did.
I don't remember there being one,
Though,
but I feel like one should exist.
I mean, we've all read it, but I don't think I did an audio version of that. No.
I will double check. I think you might have, but I think you would know. Suppose that an apprentice shepherd is laboriously trained to count sheep as they pass in and out of a fold. Thus the shepherd knows when all the sheep have left and when all the sheep have returned. If you then give the shepherd a few apples and say, "How many apples?" and the shepherd stares at you blankly because they weren't trained to count apples, just sheep, you would probably suspect that the shepherd didn't understand counting very well, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great analogy.
To the shepherd, it's just a ritual. He doesn't understand what numbers are.
Exactly, and if it's the kind of thing that they can only do in this one sense, where they're standing outside the paddock or fold or whatever you call it, the cage of sheep, when they're all leaving and coming back, and they can't do anything else, they don't understand the principle, and they're not. So in this case, this shepherd isn't not a scientist, but not a real counter.
Yeah.
Mathematician is probably too strong of a word, but
I'm kind of just breaking my brain trying to think of like whether that would even be possible that someone could count sheep and not apples. Like, are they using a different kind of math?
Well, no, you know that after 2 comes 3, after 3 comes 4, after
Yeah.
4 comes 5, and then once the sheep start coming in, you go backwards. So it's just walking up and down, a path, but it doesn't necessarily apply to apples, right?
so. What I think you're saying, what Jess was saying, is that possible that a human could be that compartmentalized? And I don't know if it's possible with counting, if it's cognitively possible with humans, but it definitely is in other slightly more complex domains,
Yeah,
right?
it's obviously possible with science,
Yeah.
with beliefs about the world. But yeah, I think like math is, I don't know. I know we should just move on. That was just like, I was confused by that analogy because I was like, I don't think math works that way.
No, I see what I like what you're saying though. Like, can you really be that broken? And maybe not that broken, but slightly less broken.
Okay. It still makes for a very vivid analogy, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of ruined it. I'm sorry.
I disagree. I think it's fun to think about. So, yeah, I mean, is it a ritualized tradition for testing hypotheses experimentally? Like, why should you test them experimentally? If you're a scientist and that's your job, that's why. But if you're a lowercase s scientist and it's your job, that's why. If you're capital S scientist and that's who you are, it's because you want to have an accurate map of the territory.
Yeah.
And testing is the only way to do that.
Yeah. He has this thing that I sometimes quote, not verbatim, but I make this analogy as well, that when you look down to see your shoes, to see if your shoelaces are untied, photons arrive from the sun, bounce off your shoelaces, strike your retina, are transduced into a neural firing, are reconstructed by your visual cortex into an activation pattern that's strongly correlated with the current shape of your shoelaces. So to gain new information with the territory, you have to interact with the territory. His thoughts are correlated with the photons, which are correlated with the shoelaces. There's this direct chain that ties everything together. There has to be some real physical process whereby your brain state ends up correlated to the state of the environment. To find things out, you have to go look. And then he goes on to say that, what about a scientist who is competent in the lab, but outside believes in the spirit world? If he says something along the lines of, well, no one really knows, and I admit that I don't have any evidence, but a religious belief, it can't be disproven one way or another by observation, then Eliezer says, I cannot but conclude that this person literally doesn't know why you have to look at things.
I think that's the puzzle that you're thinking about, Jess, when you brought up the counting person. Like, is it possible that they really? I don't know. It sounds like he's being uncharitable, but it might really be the case, right?
Yeah, like maybe they just see apples and their brain just blanks. Like, no, that's not what you do with apples. You do that with sheep.
Apples are for eating.
It's really frustrating, that whole paragraph about the shoes and the sun and the photons, because I wish there was a simple way I could use that when I argue with people who don't understand why you have to look at things. Like, people who believe in ESP, it's like, well, there's like what is your proposed mechanism for how you can communicate with someone on the other side of the world with your brain? Do you understand how matter works, or energy, or neurons? And like, they just don't, or they just don't care. And they're like, well, there's some kind of energy that does it. I'm like, no, that's not. No. And I wish I could just kind of quote this at them, but then like you can't realistically. Okay, let me get my phone and pull up this sequence, and then I'm gonna talk at you for a while, and you're gonna listen.
I can think of a really butchered way to do it, which is where you grab a coin and a gun, flip the
Oh my
coin,
God.
catch it in your hand, don't show the person, and then say, is it heads or tails? If you guess wrong, I'm going to shoot you. And do you want to look first? And if they say no, then they're being crazy, right? But if they say yes, then they're admitting to the value of looking at things, right?
Yeah, but that's not how they think of looking at things. I have actually quoted this thing to someone before. I mean, I just remember the basic gist of it,
Did it work?
I don't remember.
Darn.
Yeah. And I think it helped to illustrate a little bit more of what I meant by entangling your beliefs with the physical world.
For the virtue of being right, sure, but I think that the literal gun to the head analogy does illustrate that, like, no, look, if you really don't want to get shot, you have to, like, admit you probably want to see what the coin came up, right?
Yeah.
It's not socially acceptable to point guns at people.
Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe you could bet a large amount of money. And
I thought about
that's,
that, but the gun seemed to be more intense analogy.
Yeah.
But then not in real life, but just the idea. You could give this thought experiment to somebody. You don't have to actually have a gun, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess, yeah, if you encounter someone that says that, like, I can do ESP, like, me and my brother can communicate, that's like, okay, I'll give you $100 if you guys can communicate something.
I bet people money. I've never had anybody take me up on it.
Yeah.
But I've also, back when they were doing it, referred people to the James Randi challenge.
And you can't just offer to give them $100. You have to get an actual bet, so they give you $100 as well if they lose.
Right, yeah. And I would do like, hey, if you can do this, I'll give you $100. If you can't, you give me $10.
Yeah.
I'll do a 10-to-1 bet with you as high as you want to go.
Yeah.
101-to-1 bet. Like, screw it, let's do this. So, yeah, I think that's the virtue, I guess, of literally putting your money where your mouth is, I guess.
Making
Or
your beliefs
figuratively
pay
putting
rent.
your money where your mouth is.
Mhm.
Because literally, joke about eating money. So the idea that, like, no, look, if you really believe this, you should be prepared to take this bet. The fact that you won't take this bet means that you don't really believe it, right?
I think there are. I think it was mentioned in the post as well, though, that the sheeps and the apples thing is because lots of times, I mean, we live at such a higher level of the world than where physics happens that lots of times it does look like different rules apply to different things. Like birds can fly, squirrels can't. Why exactly is that? I don't know. They appear to work with different rules. Like the sun is in the sky and doesn't fall down, unlike every physical thing we've ever seen. Why does that work? I don't know. There's different rules for the sun and the moon and things that are up there. And I think, Eliezer pointed out that once you know why the rules work, you can see that they're the same for sheeps and apples. And what did he say? Oh yeah, Isaac Newton is justly revered not for his outdated theory of gravity, but for discovering that, amazingly and surprisingly, the celestial planets in the glorious heavens obeyed just the same rules as falling apples, which is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. I liked a bit of a digression. I liked the bad answer to why might things be this, if you could be that compartmentalized. It's like, all right, so if 7 sheep go out and 8 go out, 15 had better come back.
Mm-hmm.
Why 15 and not 14 or 3? A bad, if someone doesn't really understand counting, the reason might be because otherwise you don't get dinner tonight if the wrong number come back. But
if you understand the rules, there's a deeper reason.
right, and then that's more generalizable. Yeah.
So at the very end of this post, he brings it back to, this is entirely a coincidence, by the way. I did not plan for these two things to coincide like this. But he brings it back to maybe we can beat the proverb, be rational in our personal lives, not just our professional lives. Maybe we can do better. An ambition that lacks the comfortable modesty of being able to confess that outside of your specialty, you're no better than anyone else. And that, yeah, I mean, I guess that helped spark the whole rationalists should do better in the world than people without rationality thing as well, because you should be able to do better, right? If
Yeah.
you're able to really actually understand the rules.
Yeah. If you think of winning as making your beliefs pay rent rather than you know, your terminal goal should be to run a successful business or to be the next Elon Musk, then that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
It's just a way of checking yourself.
So you wreck yourself less.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I was when I read that I was very he links the comfortable modesty back to the post about we covered I think either 1 or 2 episodes ago about false modesty. I almost didn't pull this to include it in here because I felt like really scared and challenged by this line. As in, I was like, oh shit, now I have to do better in the real world. I can't just say, look, you know, I'm doing the best I can. I'm just another guy like everyone else. And now I'm like, fuck. This is calling on me to be better and not just hide behind the false modesty of, oh, what can you do?
Well, and that's what the community was asking us too, and that's how it ties in really well to the episode, right?
Yeah.
The community wants to know why aren't we crushing it all the time, and there's people looking at answers for that and how best approaches. But the sense that there's this sense that, and I think I agree, that we shouldn't be content to not be doing better. If there's avenues to success, we should be damn well able to incorporate them and use them, right?
Yeah. Especially if they're things we actually want.
Yeah.
And there are things we want. We listed a bunch of goals that the community did have. You know, improving AI, improving, you know, epistemic rationality, improving, you know, people's cognitive awareness of biases and whatnot, effective altruism. If these are things that we do all agree that we want, then I almost think it's a cop-out to not pursue them.
Yeah. And we win by not destroying the world every single day.
Yeah.
Baseline winning. That's not losing. All right.
I think it also helps us to function better in a society that is not optimized for us.
Now, what do you mean by that?
I don't know. I think that society is more optimized for people that,
That just want to, you know, follow baseline reality,
yeah.
have the 2 kids and the house and
Like,
a certain salary.
I've always felt that I don't fit into the world very well, that I'm kind of weird and odd. And this has helped me relate to the world and understand it and how I fit in quite a bit better. And also, like, finding a community of like-minded people has helped quite a bit, too, with that.
Yeah, I agree. There was someone in the comments of one of the articles, I forget, it might have been Sailor Vulcans, said that it was a mistake to make a community out of rationality. And I
Yeah.
kind of chafed at that because I was like, well, first of all, I don't think that it would ever not be a community. If you get enough people who are like-minded, like they were saying, Less Long should have just been a project group. In the moment that we tied all of our relationships and our friendships and everything into it, that was a bad idea. I think not. I think a lot of people actually have, like, improved their lives a lot by having groups of people that are like-minded.
Yeah. Strong
I mean,
disagree as well.
Even it just gives me more accountability, if nothing else, for like why aren't you achieving your goals? If I'm in a community of people who care about the same things I care about and notice that I'm deluding myself, you know, I can't check myself all the time, but it's useful to have other people around me that can say, hey, you said you were going to do this and didn't. What happened?
Yeah. Cultivating a community that that can help you hold yourself to higher standards.
And remind me what my values are is pretty important too, because it's easy to fall back into the, you know, societal default mindset.
Yeah, if you're just doing what everyone else is doing, then you won't even know if you're making a mistake or not, right? You're just following the script.
Jess, I totally believe you can wait 6 more days for a new phone.
I don't know, man. It's really inconvenient.
It's just a few more days. You can do it.
Yeah. I might have already picked out the phone I want anyway, and I doubt there's going to be a really good Black Friday sale on it, but it's worth waiting just in case.
Okay.
And that's the shocking way that I realized that today is November 17th and
Oh my
not
God.
way earlier in the month. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Can someone get working on that time machine too?
Yeah, geez.
At the very least, just a time turner. If I could just have a few more hours each day.
That's one thing that I just loved about Methods of Rationality was his like wanting to have a 3-hour wedding with him, Quirrell, and the Time Turner. Because like I totally get your love
Yeah.
for the Time Turner.
Yeah.
I'm as infatuated with it as you are, and I'd be just as ecstatic and protective of it as you are.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about it was he's like immediately, oh, I've got the ability to control time. What should I do first? Prank myself.
I only get one chance to fuck with myself this hard. I'm going
So delightful.
For it.
All right. Next episode, we will talk about the episodes "Politics is the Mind Killer." Dun dun dun! It shows up, and "Just Lose Hope Already," and there will be links to both of those at thebayesianconspiracy.com.